so much of what we go through is not having better circumstances than somebody else, but it has a whole lot to do with whether or not we react the right way. And we react in a godly way versus reacting in a non-godly way. But the nice thing about what we're going to be learning today is we're going to be impacting a truly godly person. A couple of godly people, actually. One will be the general of Israel's armies. The other will be the actual judge that we're talking about today. We're meeting Deborah for the first time. And Deborah, if my toy could work here today, very good. Deborah, actually, what we're going to be dealing with these two right here, Naphtali and Zebulun. Those are two of the 12 tribes we're going to be dealing with today. And actually, the enemy is going to be kind of off in here. We're going to introduce to him. But around the Sea of Galilee, this is really where the entire action takes place, including a river here, a port here, and this is just this localized situation here with Deborah, and Barak is the other man that we're going to meet. Now, Barak is included on some lists as a judge as well. However, on other lists he's not, and I'll tell you why. He's not really a judge. He is following after the directions of Deborah in our story today. And the reason for that is because Deborah has demonstrated herself. You know, the Bible actually tells us as Christians not to elevate people to leadership positions very quickly after meeting them. There's a reason for that, is because time reveals all, doesn't it? What you find out is, given time, you learn more about people's giftedness, their attitude, their disposition. You learn a lot more than what their first communication with you is. Ladies and gentlemen, you remember the difference between your first and second date versus the last date you were on several years into your marriage. You have a slightly different person sitting across from you at that dinner. You learn more about somebody over time. We figure that out because Barak actually is very responsive to Deborah. And we're going to see why here in our story today. So Judges chapter 4, and this is immediately following, we were introduced to Shamgar very, very briefly, and then we were introduced to Ehud right before that. Ehud is essentially the judge that Deborah replaces in the minds of the people. Verse 1 of chapter 4, again the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord now that Ehud was dead. Remember our cycle that we've been going through, friends, right? This is misbehavior. If you could follow a circle around, just in generalities, the sin of the people, and then God corrects them, judges them, has usually a foreign nation come in and dominate them. And then they feel the pain, the weight of that oppression, and they call out to the Lord. The Lord sends a deliverer and delivers them from the oppression. There's a brief moment of celebration, and yea, we're not under anybody's thumb anymore. And then it's right back to that kind of rebellious sin. This cycle continues all the way through the book of Judges. We have it again here. What is the evil they did in the eyes of the Lord? This is the same evil that's been going on, isn't it? This is the same evil about people abandoning their own worldview that was taught to them by their own God and actually pulling other people in as far as, we're being open-minded. We're being non-judgmental, right? All these key words that we use today in America. So we're not judging them. In fact, we're moving in right alongside them. And we're taking our worldview and their worldview, and we're kind of melding them together because we take all comers. We take anybody who disagrees with us. In fact, we're going to move in right next door, and we're going to adopt their customs and culture. We're even going to intermarry. We talked about that each of the last couple of weeks as a reason why God tells us not to be unequally yoked. It's not because the Lord's people are better than anybody else. Certainly not. Israel wasn't better than anybody else. Christians are not better than anybody else. But simply, there's a difference in this world. There's two different kinds of people. There are people who know they need God and people who don't think they do. That's really the only difference. Israel's kind of waffling between the two realities right now. A lot of them thinking that their journey with God is over because they have the promised land. Well, so they have done evil in the sight of the Lord. They've even adopted other gods. And their retort back to you at the time would have been, well, everybody has multiple gods. We've just added gods to the pantheon of what we believe. No big deal. Jehovah's still important. We've just added a few other gods that are cool. They're good for our harvest. They're good for having babies. Right? So a compromise of essential worldview, a compromise of what God has taught them over the generations. And we are finding yet again this pattern of when a judge dies, passes on, then with that leadership vacuum, they go right back to following their old behaviors again. So this is this evil in the sight of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. Verse 2. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Here's Hazor right up here, northeast of the Sea of Galilee. Hazor actually is the way you pronounce that. In Hazor, Sisera, the commander of the army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim. That's right up here. There's a modern day port that's right here that Israel has, and that is the general location of Harosheth Hagoyim. And because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. So where are we in our cycle? They have sinned before the Lord. God has sent an enemy to oppress them, to judge them for their sin. Remember, the angel of the Lord that we believe is Jesus, the pre-incarnate Christ. He appeared before them and said, because of your misbehavior, because of your rebellion, I will not go ahead of you against your enemies any longer. Right? So now it is this cycle of sinning, misbehaving, and then they cry out, but with compassion, God delivers a redeemer every time. Aren't you glad that his reliability to us is not dependent upon our reliability? That his faithfulness to us is not dependent upon our faithfulness to him? And there are constant examples here in the book of Judges among the people of Israel. So, Hazor, Jabin, he sends Sisera. He's going to send Sisera to deal with a threat that becomes apparent. So for 20 years, you're going to see here, 20 years that they've dealt with this. Because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried out to the Lord for help. These chariots fitted with iron. This is iron used as a bit of armor around the front of the chariot for attacks. The way the chariots at this time were, of course, you have this flat land here, which is very advantageous here between Hazor down here, including much of Naphtali and Zebulun, right up to here to this river right here. I'm going to hear about that in a second. Most of that is flat land. Obviously important if you want chariots to dominate the area. They're not going to be very helpful on hill country, right, with the chariots. Armored with iron on the front, what typically a chariot would be there. You'd have the driver. Now you guys have seen this in movies perhaps. They've got the reins, okay? They've got horses that are drawing these chariots. They've got armor on the front of the front of the chariot there. So you've got a driver and you have a gunner. They either are throwing javelins, which are throwing spears, or they're shooting arrows. So this is a formidable weapon. And just a bunch of guys running around with swords and shields aren't going to be very strong against armored chariots. You can see why they were dominant at the time, with 900 of these things. Now Deborah, we meet Deborah here in verse 4, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at the time. Understand that this wasn't an official standing. She's leading Israel by default. There is no group of elders. There is no person, there's no king. There's no leader, strong leader like Joshua or even Ehud. Deborah is the wisest and clearly the most dedicated person to the Lord at the time. She's known as being a prophet. Some of your translations will say a prophetess. Doesn't matter. It's a prophet of God. How do we know that they're a prophet? What they predict comes true. Well, they're a 70% prophet. No such thing. Or they're, like Nostradamus, a 5% prophet. Definitely not the same thing. Okay? So we have Deborah the prophet. She's leading Israel, and this is kind of because she is so influential, because she's a prophet, because she is so wise, we're going to find out what she does to earn that reputation. But over time, she's just become the leader, de facto. Not appointed, but the people have just kind of allowed her to lead because she's so wise. All right? So verse 5, she held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel. You see Bethel, this is where the people of Israel came across down here before the Dead Sea. So here's Gilgal, here's Bethel, okay, down in here. She holds court under this palm down there, the palm of Deborah. This is where they knew they would find her, that she's always hanging out there, so the palm is actually renamed for her. Deborah didn't happen to be hanging out at the palm of Deborah. It was named for her. So she's holding court there. And I do mean literally holding court. Okay? Where she holds, and the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. This gives us images of maybe Moses. You remember Moses was acting as judge with his people. They would bring their disputes to him, and he would decide them. That would be this arbitration would be legally binding in their society. And remember the time when Jethro, his father-in-law, comes to him and says, what you're doing is too much. You need to appoint judges under you, and you handle the big stuff, they handle the small stuff, it'll be much better. He gets really good advice. But Deborah does this for her people. In today's society, we call her an arbitrator or an arbiter. These are professional people. Usually they've been in the legal profession. And what happens often in contract negotiation, the two sides will give up their right to any other kind of legal help. And they go to this arbiter. They agree that the decision this arbiter will make is legally binding. And that's exactly what they did for Deborah. Without a formal court system, she is the courts. And it's obviously been a successful thing because they all value her counsel. Remember, of course, the issue with Solomon. As the two women claim the same baby, and they come before Solomon, and they say, one woman says, it's my baby. The other woman says, no, it's my baby. So how does a wise man do this? He says, well, I suggest you cut the baby in half and give a half to each mother. And one mother says, are you kidding? That'd be awful. And the other mother says, good idea. The one mother proves that she's the actual mother because she says, no, just give the baby to her, but please don't cut the baby in half. Right? So Solomon uses that little trick. No intention of cutting the baby in half, but clearly trying to demonstrate who is the real mother, who is the mother that truly cares for this child, and he finds it out. So Deborah does this for her people, truly holding court for the people of Israel, their disputes decided. And verse 6, she sent for Barak, son of Binoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord God of Israel commands that you take 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. Now, up here, north of the Sea of Galilee, this is Kadesh Naphtali, right in here. And he's going to be recruiting from these two tribes, Naphtali and Zebulun, he's going to be recruiting an army of 10,000. Now, he's not sure he can do that yet, because he's going to say, we're going to attack somebody. And they're going to say, attack who? And he's going to say, the 900 iron chariots. And they're going to go, see you later. And that's what he's sure is going to happen. So he's not sure about this recruiting thing. Also, take him to the hill of Tabor, down here around Nazareth, okay, in this area down here. Actually, it's right down in here. From Nazareth is down in here, part of the towns of the Sea of Galilee. And Tabor is right down in here, nearly Ischar. Mount Tabor is not really a mountain. It's a little hill. You can see it from several different directions off the Sea of Galilee. And it's this little hill. So it's interesting what Deborah's going to tell him to do. So take these 10,000 to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, a gun from Hatzor, and his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. This is where they'll come from, because the general is from here. So they'll come from this direction toward Mount Tabor, about there. So what Deborah actually wants him to do, grab 10,000 guys, willing army men, soldiers, and put them at the top of Mount Tabor. Now Barak's got to be thinking, this sounds like a bad plan. I'm going to take 10,000 men, I'm going to go to the top of Mount Tabor, and I'm going to wait for these chariots. This is basic siege warfare. All they're going to do is surround the mountain, the hill, with their chariots, and there are so many chariots that they don't have more than 10 yards for one chariot to the next if they were to surround the hill. That sounds like pretty good coverage. 10 yards is a first down in the NFL, guys. Not very much territory at all. 30 feet at most. But in tight quarters, these chariots will surround the base of the mount. And if they try to escape, here come these chariots, right? So Barak is thinking, I'm not real good. I'm not thinking this is a real good plan. So he says in verse 8, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. What is he thinking here? What is Barak's mindset? It is, if you really believe this is from the Lord, you'll risk your own behind with me. You want to go up Mount Tabor with the 10,000 men and me? You feel perfectly safe? Then I believe you're talking to the Lord. But if you want to stay here and you want to send me off on this little chore, I don't think I'm willing. You can kind of understand where Barak's coming from. Now, he wouldn't even be listening to her, friends. This is a woman, and talk about a patriarchal society. We think that modern day America is patriarchal. Please. By comparison, not even close. Okay? So Deborah would have to work twice as hard in those days to be considered a leader of any kind. She is not only considered a leader, a righteous judge, a prophet of God, she's considered the de facto leader of her people. All of them. So Barak says, okay, I'll buy this if you come with me. Okay? Verse 9, certainly I will go with you, says Deborah, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. So she goes with him to go up and recruit up here. Then they will march back down here on the western side of the Sea of Galilee to Mount Tabor. So she says, I'll go with you. But you're realizing now that God is going to deliver Sisera, the general of the enemy army, into the hands of a woman. What do you think Barak is thinking? That she's talking about herself, perhaps. Well, we're going to find out that's not at all what Deborah means as we continue with the story. I will go with you, she says. Verse 10, then Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him. No one is more surprised than Barak. He calls for 10,000 men, thinking that 5 will show up, and 10,000 men show up ready to do the job. I find it interesting that 11,000 didn't show up, nor 9,500. 10,000 men show up, exactly the amount that Deborah asked for, hearing from the Lord. Verse 11, now Heber, the Kenite, had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Zananim near Kadesh. All right, so here's the Kenites. They're like, where are they in this part of the story? Well, this is Hobab. He is the brother of Moses' bride when he went to Midian. You remember this story? Moses kills an Egyptian taskmaster because he's too cruel with the Israelite slaves. He knows he needs to get out of Dodge because he just murdered somebody. He flees to Midian, and he meets this family. He falls in love with the daughter. He becomes good friends with the rest of the family. This is Hobab, his brother-in-law. Well, these are his descendants because they end up following the people of Israel, kind of being adopted by them. They are not Israelites, but they live in the land, probably with full permission of the Israelites, considering their history. This is the family of the wife of Moses. They would have been treated with great respect. One of the few people groups or situations that were treated with great respect by the Israelites. Verse 12, when they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, and Sisera summoned from Harosheth Hagoyim, because that's where his home was, to the Kishon River, all his men and his 900 chariots fitted with iron. We don't know how many soldiers there were that he had with the chariots, but that's 1,800 men right there that are just riding the chariots. Probably a huge army, probably more than twice the size, some scholars believe at least twice the size of the 10,000 Israelites have been gathered. What do the Israelites have? Sword. That's it. No great armor, no siege equipment, no chariots. But here they gathered up to Mount Tabor. Now that would have been a very inviting target for Sisera and the armies of Hazor, as they see them up on the mountain. Well, let's go get them, the fools. They can't stand up to these chariots. So you think, if you're any kind of a tactician, you're thinking at the top of this mountain, I'm not coming down to the flatlands, because that's where the chariots are going to be mighty. I don't want to deal with armed chariots with my sword, ting, ting, ting. That's not going to be a good thing. So we're going to stay up here, he probably thinks to himself. Well, when they start to approach, you can see them off in the distance, because on top of Mount Tabor, you can see miles in every direction. So you see from the west this huge army coming with its 900 chariots. Sisera the general, mighty general, he's going to wipe out these upstart of the tribe of Zebulun and Naphtali up here. These guys don't know who they're dealing with, of course. So Deborah, verse 14, said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" I can just imagine Barak's looking at Deborah like, are you nuts? We're going to come down from the safety of the mountain actually and attack them head on? But yet, there's no pause here. He's been convinced now that Deborah is speaking for God. And he believes. It is amazing, friends, when we are able to do two things in the Christian walk. Same as the Israelites needed to do. When you give up your cares to God, and when you throw down your crowns before God. We're going to talk about that as we continue to go on here. But we all have our crowns, and we all have our hang-ups, our difficulties, our concerns. Those are two things that stand in the way of God really doing a work in your heart. The crowns are things that we arrogantly pursue as being absolutely necessary in our life. The crown of comfort. The crown of achievement, the crown of authority and power, right? Even perhaps the authority or the crown of money. These are all things that are obstacles. We also have the cares that end up being obstacles in our relationship with God. They are our worries. Amen? Did Barak have a worry here when he saw this army approaching with its 900 chariots? I would say he had a worry or two. We tend to think that we're the only ones who worry. Can I just tell you that if you worry, if you're concerned about something right now, if you have a worry, you're in good company right now. The only difference between you and maybe somebody else is how much you have surrendered to God and how much you have cast down of the crowns that you wear. I am entitled to... No, you're not. I need to have... No, you don't. Barak has a legitimate concern, and yet there's no hesitation at all, because he is absolutely convinced the Lord is in this. So Barak went down Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. You imagine the look on Sisera's face at this point. What is this crazy man doing? 10,000 men in their cloaks and swords? This is akin to the sword that Ehud had. These aren't broadswords. These are little hand swords, 18 to 24 inches in their hands. This is going to break iron? Not a chance. Also, where do you think that for their farm working or for their weapons or for anything like that, where did the Israelites get theirs? From Hazor. Think they sold them the best of quality? Perhaps not. Kept the best of quality for themselves. They had a very difficult time taking care of the iron process there in Israel by themselves. So he charges down, Sisera looking rather confused, of course. And at Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. So these 10,000 men with swords, merely swords, they wipe out this army, including the 900 chariots, wipe them out. Sisera the general, the mighty general of Hazor, what are these guys thinking? He flees on foot because he's afraid he's next. Now, by any strategy of today, you would look at this battle and say, this is an impossibility. There's no way. In fact, you're going to have to wait till next week, or you can read ahead to the Song of Deborah, which gives us a few more details as to how the Lord actually did this. But we see that no soldier could boast about this battle on the Israelite side, because clearly this is a miracle. Well, nobody could possibly boast about winning Jericho, yet some people were able to do that. Never underestimate the capacity for human beings to take credit that is not deserved. Right? So Barak pursued, verse 16, the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim. Again, that's back over here again. Back to the birthplace of Sisera. And all of Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. What an amazing victory. Only God could make that happen. Sisera, meanwhile, verse 17, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Oh, we're back to the Kenites here, friends. Because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Verse 18, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Do not be afraid." Very motherly, right? And so he entered her tent, and she covered him up with a blanket, maybe a skin kind of made of animal skin blanket, comfortable, warm. "I'm thirsty," he says in verse 19. "Please give me some water." She opened up, instead of giving him some water, she opens up a skin of milk, of goat's milk. That would have been a much more, for more of a VIP to come into it. So she's treating him with great respect. Not water. You deserve milk. You should get milk. So a drink of milk she gives him. And then she covers him up all the way to his head. "You sleep. You rest." Very, very sweet, kind, welcoming. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he says in verse 20. "If anyone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone there?' say no." Mighty General Sisera wants this woman to stand guard at the tent. Please don't let the bad guys come get me. Verse 21, but Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. And she drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. I love the end of that, because as she drove the tent peg through his temple into the ground. That's how far she drove it. And he died. I should hope so, because that headache I don't want to feel. Okay? All the way to the ground, right through his head. I think she needs to get out more. She's got this pent up, frustration and anger. Right? I don't think I would, if I was, Hobab, the descendant of Hobab here, the Kenite, I think Heber would best sleep in his own tent, maybe, with that girl. No, she does this to the enemy. Picks up the tent peg and does her business. Verse 22. Just when Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him, "Come," she said, "I will show you the way to the man you're looking for." Fascinating. It must have been an experience for Barak as well, going, wait, you're going to get hurt. Don't announce. Let us sneak up on the tent. And then, don't worry. Yeah. Sisera ain't going to be doing much lately. Hasn't been doing much lately, and he won't be doing anything anymore. "Come," she said, "I will show you." So he went with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. Through his head, but he's still talking. No, he's dead. Verse 23, on that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. Now, the question on your minds might be, was this a guy that Joshua and the people right after Joshua were supposed to take care of? Absolutely. Absolutely. And because he's still around causing mischief, causing trouble, more than mischief and trouble, he dominated the northern peoples of Israel for 20 years. And we discussed what that was about. That was protection money, right? Protection not just from other tribes around, protection from himself, from his own forces. That's mob money. That's mob protection money. Tribute they would bring to him. He would force some into indentured servitude or just plain old slavery. This was the way of things back then. And it takes 20 years for the people of Israel to call out to God. Now, who knows what they're thinking before they call out to God? But it takes 20 years of that kind of punishment before they call out to the Lord. Undoubtedly, people probably came to Deborah and said, "How long will this torture last, prophet of God?" But it took them 20 years to call out. Eventually, Jabin is defeated. And this group from Hatzor is no longer a threat to the northern tribes. But of course, guys, what we see here are very few in the north being all that dedicated to their relationship with God. Why does this actually have a happy ending of sorts? Except for Sisera. He has a very bad day. But why does this have a happy ending for the Israelites? Is because there was a Deborah and there was a Barak. And Barak was willing to throw off his crown of being the head of the armies of Israel and taking orders from a woman. That would have been extremely difficult for him. But he had to be convinced that God was speaking. He would not have been able to raise 10,000 men to go off into battle at the behest of a woman unless they were convinced that God was speaking through her and through Barak. But Barak could have been very prideful. You know, you see an inclination of his pride, but it's not, "I'm not going to follow you, Deborah, into battle." What he's saying is, "I want to make sure that you're talking for the Lord. If you are, I'm all game. I'm all in. Let's do it." So he had to cast off his crowns. He had to release his own concerns. Friends, can I just encourage you this day that part of what keeps us from really being touched by the Lord is our worries and our arrogancies, hubris and stress. Arrogantly thinking that we are better than our difficult circumstances. How dare this happen to me? Well, I don't do that, Pastor. I'm not sure I believe you. I do it. We all do it, right? We get indignant. How dare this set of circumstances happen to me? How dare this happen to my family? That's not fair. And we don't really mean fair. We mean fair to me. Lord, you have dealt unfairly with me. Well, you know what that does? That stops the progress of God's work in your life. Doesn't fully stop it because God's will is God's will, but it certainly delays, and it keeps you from being cooperative. And so God has less of an opportunity to work from the inside out. For us as Christians, friends, for the Holy Spirit to continue to work. I don't believe that you're helping me. I don't believe that you're good for me. How dare you do this to me to cause change in my life? I've said those words. When I lost someone of value, I've said those words when circumstances in my life were difficult to process. But friends, when we hold fast to those crowns, as tiny as they are, and we hold tight instead of releasing those worries as concerns, well, if I give up this amount of time, how will I have time for anything else? If I give up these resources, how will I possibly do everything that I'm planning on doing in the future? Our worries and our concerns. How could I possibly go to church? I might get a disease. Are your worries and concerns keeping you from what God can do in your heart? That's not just for everybody here this morning, that's for everybody who's watching this video. Is there something that's keeping you from embracing the plan that God has for you? For 20 years, people sat around and just kind of accepted what had happened. Are you accepting kind of a mediocrity from your faith in God? Do you pray only when people remind you to? Do you read your Bible only when the pastor pesters you about it? That darn pastor, I'll read to shut him up. Friends, if you know what book has the answers to the questions, and you have an open invitation to walk into the throne room of God anytime you want, what's left to worry you? Deborah wasn't worried. Barak had his worries settled. Because once he was sure that God was speaking, he followed. even when the plan didn't make any human sense. We can't do that. 10,000 men against that army and those chariots, that's impossible. Nothing is impossible with God. Let's pray.